Good morning, good afternoon, and a very good evening to you wherever you may be. My name is Wajahat Saeed Khan. I'm a journalist based in New York City, reporting on Pakistan and the rest of South Asia. We know the story of modern Pakistan. Of the 23 prime ministers that the Islamic Republic has endured, none of them has survived a full term. In fact, some of them have never survived. Some of them have been booted. Some of them have been scared out of office. Some of them have been exiled. And some of them have been killed. One of them has been executed wrongfully after incarceration. Thus, it is no surprise that Imran Khan today is being compared to Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who was executed more than 40 years ago wrongfully under a military regime for not bending the knee or compromise with Pakistan's generals. Khan's political track record and recent history indicate and validate such a comparison. He survived an assassination attempt, which has never been properly investigated. He's currently incarcerated on what many conclude are bogus charges. He's been denied proper medical access despite demanding it and deserving it. And in fact, just recently, his wife, the former First Lady, Bushra Imran Khan, has, according to medical reports, also been possibly poisoned while she was under custody. Now, all of this is being noted in Washington, D.C., where just recently, the top-ranking Democrat in Senate, Chuck Schumer, has spoken to the Pakistani ambassador, Masood Khan. Less spoken, more warned, with a simple message. Do not kill Imran Khan while he's in jail. What was said in this phone call? Why is a top US senator who happens to be an ally of the Biden administration making this call? What are the implications of this for Imran's political and personal fate? And what are the implications of this for policy as it evolves about Pakistan in Washington? We know that in the last 22 months, several congressmen have run different campaigns fueled by the Pakistani diaspora about not recognizing the Pakistani government. That hasn't worked. The US today is working with the Pakistani government. We know that letters have been written in protest. We know that protests have been held. We even know that a Senate Foreign Relations subcommittee hearing has been held, where in an attempt to take one senior U.S. administration official, Donald Lu, to task about his role in this so-called regime change which occurred in Pakistan more than 2 years ago. But so far, since that time, we haven't seen such language, such a warning come out of Washington that do not kill Imran Khan. Why has this come out now? And what are people in Washington thinking? Are they actually thinking that there has been a compromise? And are there chances that Khan will be killed? That's the story we are covering today. This show is in English because of the implications of the story. ये शो अंग्रेजी में इसलिए है क्योंकि शो की नौयत ही ऐसी है, because on what you're seeing on the right side of the screen is the story broken by The Intercept, which has done a pretty remarkable job covering Pakistan over the last year or so. It's about this phone call, and with me to expand on the story, I'm joined by its two co-authors, Ryan Grimm and Murtaza Hussain. Welcome back to the show, guys. I wish it was under happier circumstances, but this is a story of a very different nuance. You've reported on policy. You've reported on that so-called memo. You've reported on the Donald Lu connection. But this is not just any low-ranking congressman from Texas. You reported on those guys as well. This is the top-ranking Democrat in Senate. Chuck Schumer is a pretty big deal. Chuck Schumer making this warning is a pretty big deal. Ryan Grimm, I'm going to start off with you. What are the implications of the story as it stands, as you've broken it?
Right. The Senate has only 100 members compared to the 435 that make up the teeming kind of people's house. And so, it can be easy to find people of all different opinions and persuasions over in the House, but the Senate is considered, the more august chamber. The Democrats also control the Senate, whereas they do not control the House of Representatives. So that means that Democrats who are in the Senate have more power over the agenda. Chuck Schumer is the uncontested Senate Majority Leader. He will be Senate Majority Leader as long as he wants to remain in the Senate, as far as any observers of the upper chamber go. So, other than Biden, you don't have a more powerful Democrat in Washington. And so for Schumer to raise this issue of Imran Khan's safety with the Pakistan ambassador surely would be noticed back home, and is meant to send a signal that whatever the State Department might be saying at its press briefings, and whatever rubber stamp they might be somewhat willing to put on the elections from February, the U.S. will not stand for Imran Khan to be killed while in Pakistan custody.
Right. So, Maz, on to you. If this is such a significant man, he's an important man. We've seen other people en masse. We've seen more than 100 congressmen write a collective letter. We've seen people hold protests, vigils. These are elected members of Congress, but it really hasn't moved the needle in Washington, in the Biden administration. They've carried on. They've put their blinders on. And that's premised primarily on the security relationship that the administration enjoys, in fact, prioritizes with Islamabad, rather Rawalpindi, the home of the military. Will this move the needle? And does Schumer have the muscle to move the needle on, if not the Biden administration's official policy for Pakistan, then unofficially sending a message that, hey, don't kill this man in custody?
Well, as Ryan mentioned, Schumer is one of the most influential political figures in American politics. For many, many years, it's been the case. And if you look at it in perspective, the Pakistani establishment is very sensitive to the views of people in Washington. They've demonstrated that many, many times, not least in the removal of Imran Khan, which seemed to have been triggered by or incentivized in part by a mid-level State Department official, Donald Liu. So if you take Donald Liu's words seriously, you should take Chuck Schumer's words many, many magnitudes more seriously, because he represents a significant trend in the American political establishment and also the American public. And for him to make this call, it indicates that the Democratic Party at the most senior levels, and you can say the mainstream of the Democratic Party, it takes this issue very, very seriously and would not approve of Imran Khan being killed in custody. And I think that this call has to be placed in context of, number one, as you mentioned, Wajahat, the Pakistani American diaspora's lobbying and activism on this issue, but also increasing fears clearly in the American establishment that these threats against Imran Khan's life are credible. And Khan himself has been talking about, if anything happens to me, Asim Munir will be responsible, it clearly indicating that he fears, I think justifiably, that he could meet the fate of other prime ministers in the past. So I think Schumer's call, I think that it should be taken very seriously in Islamabad, and I expect it will be as well too. Because if, like I said, if the State Department's views at a bureaucratic level are taken seriously, Schumer's views are so much more potentially weighty for the future of the U.S.-Pakistan relationship. And for him to make this call is clearly a warning shot across the bow of the Pakistani establishment about Khan's fate.
Right. Now, Ryan, according to your reporting, Schumer's office hasn't commented on this. The Pakistani embassy has not commented on this. But what are you hearing, perhaps on background? What are you hearing? And again, to really propel this forward, what do you see in terms of gaming this out? Do you see the Pakistani generals, and you've of course reported on the Pakistani military as well. I'm assuming you have ingress there as well. Do you think that this will perhaps soften Rawalpindi's or the military's position on Khan? Do you think, because this is a pretty loud message?
It is a loud message. And the question that Rawalpindi, I'm sure, will be asking is, how loud is the message and how serious is it? Because, Schumer has all manner of levers that he can use. He could He can put out a terse statement. He can send a letter to the ambassador. He can speak privately to the ambassador and then have that information leaked. He could go to a podium and speak publicly. He'd give a speech. He could send a letter to the State Department making demands. Like there's a range of actions that he could take, and the one that he did take, is pretty high up there, in the sense of kind of the willingness to kind of go out, say it directly to the Pakistan ambassador, because it puts Pakistan on notice that if something does happen to Imran Khan, they now have, not only have they done everything that they've done, but they've also embarrassed Chuck Schumer. Chuck Schumer, the way that our political system and our legislative system works, Chuck Schumer can almost single-handedly write legislation. If you're the Senate Majority Leader, most pieces of legislation. Take, for instance, last night, this omnibus piece of war funding legislation that went through, that simultaneously banned or forced the sale of TikTok, funded tens of billions of dollars for the Ukraine war, money for the Israel war, relief money for Gaza, money for Taiwan, beefing up the defenses in that region. All of that was in one piece of legislation that is written by basically the leaders of each party. So it's not the old school system where it goes through a subcommittee and then it goes through a committee and it's marked up in public and debated. It's written behind closed doors, and then members of the Senate and members of the House, have a couple hours to a couple days to read it and negotiate it. Chuck Schumer can just write a line in there that says whatever he wants it to say, and as long as he runs that past Mitch McConnell, the Republican minority leader, and they usually have a deal. Like, something's really important to you, and it's not important to me, go ahead.
Right.
Put it in there. So he could do anything he wanted to Pakistan, basically.
Right. So this means that the Pakistan issue is now in the big leagues, in the legislative branch, if I'm not mistaken. So if it's gone to the big leagues, then the S word, and Ryan, I just want you to follow up before I talk to Maz about the reporting further. If it's gone to the big leagues, then just last week, let's talk about the S word, sanctions. Now, the U.S. has placed sanctions on Pakistan's long-range ballistic missiles program by sanctioning one Belarusian company and 3 Chinese companies. Now, just a few weeks ago, it was looking like a very different picture. The generals were here. They were talking directly to administration officials. People were trying to protest. Nothing was happening. There was that Donald Lu hearing. Nothing really came out of that. But all of a sudden, we've seen in the last few weeks, just the last couple of weeks, this starting to happen. Last week, it was sanctions. This week, you've got, Mr. Big League himself prompting a call. Do you think that sanctions are a potential if something happens further to Imran or overall to the Pakistani polity? Can Chuck Schumer write off sanctions against Pakistan?
He can. In fact, they have done it before in the Senate when they were angry at Russia. They were angry at Iran. They just write it into a piece of legislation, and it forces the administration to apply sanctions. So they have that mechanism. But he can also just pick up the phone, and the Senate Majority Leader, when he picks up the phone and calls the Treasury Department, which implements sanctions, is going to get his call returned, because everybody in the administration needs something out of the Senate. There's also the Magnitsky Act, which targets kind of individual public officials who have assets here in the United States. So let's say you bought a Miami condo to park $10 million of ill-gotten gains or something in Manhattan. They could just seize that overnight using the Magnitsky Act, and that doesn't target any sector in Pakistan. It doesn't target an industry, but it can go after very specific individuals, and that's often a direction that state likes to go first, before they hit an entire industry or sector, which then trickles down on the public.
Wow, so things have escalated. Murtaza, just about the reporting. Now, you've been doing this for the last year or so. You've been really, you guys have dug deep inside the diaspora. according to this story, this was triggered by the actions, the lobbying, the pressure, the advocacy of the Pakistani diaspora. Now, Chuck Schumer is where I'm from, New York. He's a New York senator. But explain to us, besides the lobbying and the efforting, how is this moment in particular? Now, we've encapsulated it and called it the big leagues, but how is this bit different from all the other stories, the letters, the other advocacy movements and campaigns that you've covered? How is this different versus those achievements for the regular Pakistani observer? He doesn't know what the difference between a Senate Majority Leader and, I don't know, Greg Kazar is. What's the difference right now in this?
I think that the significant turning point was reached after the Pakistani elections, because obviously the elections were so flagrantly rigged and fraudulent. And as much as the Pakistani establishment and the military can control public sentiment inside Pakistan, basically through coercion at this point, they cannot do the same with the Pakistani diaspora, which is very dispersed around the West and the Middle East. Many of them are educated and economically well off. They have the ability to lobby their politicians, and in the United States, they have a right to lobby their politicians for preferred policies and subjects. And I really agree with Ryan that Chuck Schumer, specifically this individual in this role, for them to take an interest in this subject, shows the success and momentum of this movement, which is effectively challenging the status quo in Pakistan at this point. And the election, the way it was carried out and the way it was, again, not carried out in an honest or transparent manner, it gives a lot of ballast to that, because we can say to Chuck Schumer, if someone is in the Pakistani diaspora, they can say to them, well, not only are we supporting a government which is committing X, Y, and Z, alleged human rights abuses, also there's an election that happened just now in clear view of the public and clear view of the international community, which did not live up to America's own standards of how such an election should be run. So it gives you a great talking point if you want to approach a significant political figure in the United States beyond a member of Congress, someone much more senior in this case. So seeing that Chuck Schumer, of all people, made this call, not somebody who's necessarily always after Pakistan or involved in Pakistan affairs, but responding to his constituents, shows that their efforts in lobbying politicians have reached a very successful high level. But also after the election, you see more of an appetite in the U.S. establishment to confront Pakistan, because there's more there to actually confront. Because maybe people disagreed about their views of Imran Khan or the circumstances of his removal, but it's very, very obvious that the election was rigged, and you cannot fake that any longer. And then I think the more this continues, absent some conciliation inside Pakistan, you're going to see further escalation of these efforts to impose some sort of consequences on the establishment for Imran Khan's fate specifically, but also the fate of democracy in Pakistan post-election.
Right. Well, now we've got to wrap up because, Ryan, you're a busy man. You got to go. But last question for you. Are you surprised? Now, you've been invested in this story over the last year and a half as well. We were all pretty frustrated when that Donald Liu hearing was happening last month. I've seen you be pretty frustrated in those State Department briefings in which you give Miller a tough time, and rightly so. Is this a surprise to you? It seems like almost a tipping point moment, and it's sort of come out of nowhere. It's just come really fast, really hard, and pretty. It's quite obvious. It's a warning. That's how you run it.
Mm-hmm.
Are you surprised by this? And is this the great American democratic system at work? Finally, is this what we were waiting for?
I mean, in some ways, it is. And yes, I was a bit surprised. But as you think about it backwards and deconstruct it, it does make sense, because we do still have a democratic system in this country in which politicians do feel pressure from their constituents who organize themselves into powerful factions. And I over the past year and a half, reporting on the Pakistani diaspora, I have been quite impressed by the level of organization that exists and the level of power that they've been able to exert. And you can even see over time them getting more sophisticated and getting a better understanding of how the system works and what the pressure points are. And so while I was surprised it got there this fast, it was only a matter of time until they found the right pressure points, the obvious parallels would be, you've got the NRA with all these pressure groups all over the country that basically forced Washington to take a pro-gun stance. You got the pro-Israel lobby that has members all over the country, constantly bringing pressure to bear, financial and grassroots, on Congress, and Congress responding. This is a smaller version of that, but it's functionally the same thing.
So last bit for both of you. Ryan, I'll ask you first, and then I'll have Maz go on this. If you were a betting man, game this out for us. What are 2 or 3 different scenarios from each of you about where this relationship goes? Let's contextualize this. Biden's in trouble. Some of that trouble is electoral. His popularity is waning. He has pissed off a lot, for lack of a better word. He's pissed off a lot of voters. Many of them are Muslim American voters. Many of them are Pakistani voters. Different issues. Palestine's in there, but Pakistan as well. For the first time in a long time, I've seen Pakistani Democrats saying they're going to vote the other way. Game this out election year-wise for us, as well as policy-wise. Do you see any changes happening?
There's a kind of fluke in our system that means that you're in a presidential year, your vote is only important as the state that you happen to live in. I live in Washington, D.C., which isn't even a state. And so, I basically have no say, how the presidential election is going to come. It helps the Palestinian American community that, many of them are concentrated in Michigan, which is a swing state. Pakistani diaspora seems to be, you would know this better than me, spread out around, say, New York, Texas, Washington State, and then elsewhere around the country. None of those are swing states.
Yep.
None of those are in contest. Democrats are going to win Washington State and New York. Republicans are going to win Texas. And just cynically, as a result of that, you'll see those areas just not get the same attention, and the people who live in those areas not get paid attention to. So it's not quite the same dynamic as what you're seeing with the say the Dearborn and Michigan situation.
Right. And Maz, your 2 or 3 crystal ball pointers, if you have them, about where you see this going now, this tipping point moment with Schumer in the mix now?
It's interesting. I've seen the same polarization and disenchantment with Biden that you described. I still think there's still quite a bit of time till the election, and voters seem to be fickle or forget certain things based on the time period. But I do think that the critical thing that will take place is how long the war in Gaza continues. It's such a polarizing and a prominent force in American politics at the moment. I think all signs point that it will probably continue through the Democratic convention at least, and maybe beyond that. And then, from there on, it depends. It depends how much Pakistani Americans, in this case, prioritize Pakistani issues over Palestinian issues. And I think Ryan's point is also very true, that the geographic disbursement of the diaspora also plays a role. But I think that more important than that, I think that you'll see continued pressure across administrations, even if there's a Trump administration, to lobby Republican figures potentially, on this subject, because it's going to outlast this current election. So I actually don't think that the election and the voting is actually the most salient issue vis-a-vis Pakistan policy. I think it's going to continue as long as the political crisis in Pakistan continues as well, too. And it could get as much traction under Donald Trump presidency as it does under Biden.
Right. Well, thanks for that, guys. Just so you know, for context, for our viewers as well as you guys, there's 4 or 5 clusters. There's the tri-state area, the New York, New Jersey area primarily, where there's a lot of Pakistani Americans. Texas is the good old headquarters of the Pakistani diaspora. There's parts of California, Illinois, especially centered around the Chicago suburbs, and then there's pockets here and there. There's a Pakistani everywhere. There's a 7-Eleven in these great United States. But beyond that, yes, unlike other diasporas, it's split, and most of them happen to be in non-swing states, which are not up for contention. That plays out electorally. But what I learned a lot was from this conversation, and thank you for that this man, Chuck Schumer, can single-handedly write sanctions in and determine the future of Pakistani-American bilateral ties. Ryan Grimm, Murtaza Hussain, your story is in our description. I know you guys are busy. I'm going to let you go, but I'm going to tweet this out. Please follow Ryan Grimm at Ryan Grimm. Murtaza Hussain is at Maz Hussain. The Intercept is at theintercept.com. Thank you guys for your time and reporting. We'll be in touch.
See you, Waj.
Thanks, guys.